If you're dealing with multiple plots, instead of plotting them on the same plot, you can separate them into multiple subplots in the same figure. To do this, you have to use the subplot function. This function divides your figure into as many areas as you tell it to, and each of the spots of that matrix is an individual plot. In our example, we have 3 sets of data that we want to plot. So maybe we want to plot them on the same figure but in separate plots. So let's do it. First, we need to define the dimensions of our plot matrix. We want to have 3 rows and 1 column. The subplot takes 3 arguments. The first 2 define the size, the third one is the index. So 3 rows, 1 column, and if we want our first plot to be the first in the figure, we will use index 1. If we run the code now, let's see what will happen. We get all of our plots in the first subplot because we're using hold only and we don't have the other subplots yet. But as you can see, everything is still working perfectly on that plot. It's a bit smaller, but we have lots of free space down here for 2 additional plots of the same size. So let's remove the hold on and let's say subplot of 3, 1, so we give it the same size and we give it the second index. This will put our second plot on the second spot, and the third plot, subplot 3, 1, 3, let's run it, and we get all of them plotted in an individual plot. Now, as you can see, our stylings got applied only for the third subplot that we created. Our first and second have absolutely no stylings aside from the ones that we have in the plot function. This is because each subplot is individual. If we want to have grid on all subplots, we need to say grid on and grid minor after each of the plots, like that. And if I run the code now, all plots will have grids. Of course, the rest of the stylings are still missing. We have no accesses here, and I will show you in a second how to fix this, but I first want to show you how you can rearrange these a bit. If you want to make one of the plots take up more space than the others, you simply need to create a vector with all of the indexes that you want this plot to use. So let's say that we want to have our first plot on the same spot, but we want to have both of our second and third plot on the same plot. So we are going to use hold on here, and here we need to supply it a vector of the indexes that we want this plot to occupy. So if I run it like this, you can see now that our first plot is using the first index, but our second plot is using the second and the third index. We can even switch it a bit around, and we can say that let's use a matrix of 2 by 2. Here we use 1 and 3, and here we use second and fourth index. If we run it, and as you can see, we get an error because here I have incorrect dimensions, so we also need to have 2 by 2 here, and there we have it. Now we have both of these plots in a vertical style. Now we can switch it a bit and we can leave this one the same, but separate the 2 graphs on the right side. So I'm going to remove the hold on, and I'm going to say use index 2, and here I'm going to give it index of 4, like that. And there we have it. We have 3 graphs, again in a different arrangement. You can make any combination that you want with the subplot and arrange all of the plots in any way you want. You can have even 10 subplots if you want. It's up to you. Now, what about the styling? Since we are now dealing with 3 separate plots, we need to specify 3 different sets of styling, one for each of the subplots. This can be a bit tedious since you pretty much have to write almost the same thing 3 times, but that is the way to have individual control over each of these subplots. This is why, as I said in the beginning, these customizations that we have here apply only for our last plot. So I'm going to give the grid to our second subplot as well. I'm going to also separate them. So this is our first subplot. This is the second subplot. and this is the third subplot. All right, and all of these plots need labels, so let's copy the label. The label is the same for all of the plots since all of them are using voltage and current. You can represent different things on these plots, so you can use different labels if you have to. So we have the labels. We can do the same thing for the limits. So we can copy and paste the limits for all of these plots and have them correctly created. Now, since these plots are dealing with the individual vectors, we don't need the all y values anymore. So here we can simply say the minimum of I1, of I1, of I1, of I1, like we had it in the beginning. We can do the same thing down here. So limits, this is I1, I2 actually, this is also I2, 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 and finally we have I3. So I3, 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 I3. Let's see. All right, we have correct limits for all of these subplots. And finally, we can give them a legend and a title, which are almost the same for all of them. Now, the difference, we will see the difference now. So the legend for the first subplot should only include the first resistance. So we are going to delete all of the other resistances. The same goes for the title. This is the change in current only for the first resistor. So I'm going to delete this. Let's do the same thing down here for the second subplot. So we're deleting R1 and we are deleting R3. And we are going to delete them from here as well. All right. And down here we're going to delete R1 and R2 because this is R3, like that. All right, what are we missing here? We are missing a comma. All right, let's run it. And there we have it. Changing current for R1, we have a legend. Changing current for R2, we have a legend. And for R3. But as you have probably noticed, now our legends don't have their stylings applied to them. And this is because I'm going to show you how to fix it, but I'm not going to go deep into the explanation of why this has to happen. So we need to assign our legend to a variable name. So let's say third legend equals to that. And I'm going to delete all of these stylings and leave only the value. And when I do this, now we have to use a set function. We have to give it the variable of our legend. And here we start specifying our stylings. So if we want a font size, we do it the exact same way. So let's run it. And as you can see, now it works for our third legend. The same way we can supply all of the other stylings. So we also had third legend, font weight, bold. Let's try. There we have it. And we can add all of these stylings by using the set function down here. So I'm going to quickly do it because we're already aware of all of these stylings. So set third. And now we have the exact same stylings for our third subplot for the legend. So I'm just going to copy and paste this up here. And I'm going to do the same thing. So this is the second legend. And suppress this. And here I'm just going to change this like that. I'm going to do the same thing up here for the first legend. Like that. Like this. And this is first legend. First legend. Let's run it. And now we no longer have any warnings and we have the stylings for each of our subplots.